Welcome to the BrainTap Podcast, here to help you relax, reboot, and strengthen your overworked brain. Your host, Dr. Patrick Porter, has been developing cutting-edge brainwave training technology for 3 decades. He's been featured in national publications such as the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and Inc. magazine, as well as major television networks such as NBC, CBS, and the Discovery Channel. Dr. Porter's latest development, the BrainTap Pro mobile app, can help you sleep better, lose weight, de-stress, quit smoking, or kick any other bad habit, all while increasing your energy, mindfulness, joy, peak performance, and more. Take the free BrainTap Pro Challenge. Simply register at braintap.pro. That's braintap.pro. On the BrainTap Podcast, Dr. Porter brings together a team of experts to share up-to-the-minute news in neuroscience, brain training technology, along with how mindfulness and meditation can be used to improve your life in ways you never imagined possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Patrick Porter.
Hello, this is Dr. Patrick Porter, and welcome back to BrainTap Journal Podcast. And I'm here with Dr. Cody Rall, and I was very fortunate to hear you in Hawaii, so I thought, wow, we need to get your knowledge out to our database, our users of the BrainTap technology. So, Dr. Rall, why don't you explain a little bit about what got you into this? Just tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll get into all the nuts and bolts about what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on. So I'm a psychiatrist. I completed my psychiatry residency training at Walter Reed Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. And one of the things that was really cool about the area is they had National Institute of Health right across the street. They had the NICO Brain Imaging Center there that had some of the most advanced brain imaging technology in the world. And I just got so interested in where technology is taking us in terms of understanding the brain and being able to treat things like mental illness. And so, I wanted to put out these ideas and talk about what I was learning, because I didn't think that very many people had heard about certain machines that were being used and the potentials of brain imaging or other modalities of understanding the brain and where this could take us. So I started this YouTube channel called TechforPsych, and I started talking about various things like functional MRI or, some really interesting technologies like magnetic encephalography. And then I also started talking about wearables, and it's right around the time that they were coming out with more and more devices that could read things like brainwaves. So it's a couple of companies that have I think come a long ways in the last decade that they've had these available. Some interesting ones are Interaxon with the Muse headband. There's Emotive with their Insight and Epoch headsets, and a lot of others that are actually coming along. And there was a lot of interest about that on YouTube. So I, not only was I interested, but the demand was there. So I started looking more and more into it. And it's just been this journey of learning more about, all right, what studies have been done to validate the actual technology? Is this real brainwaves? What is this doing for people? Learning more about bio and neurofeedback and the potentials of having, operant conditioning teach people how to get into different brain states, as well as physiological states, eliciting relaxation response, where people can really establish, what we call about an internal locus of control and be able to calm themselves in stressful situations. And naturally, this has been applying more and more to a military situation. So I still am active duty military at the moment. And it's been really interesting talking about this type of technology with people in the military and how that could translate into things like mental toughness, warfighter readiness, as well as treating things like depression and PTSD down the line, which are, unfortunately, these natural things that come from wartime activities. So there's been a lot that's come out of that. Some interesting things going on with the American Psychiatric Association, some interesting things going on with Stanford University, and looking at different technologies that can improve mental health and what that entails in terms of business, entrepreneurship, and all of the above. So there's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I was really impressed when you were speaking to our group at Quantum University out in Hawaii, and you were talking about the different wearables, and you mentioned Muse and Emotive, both of those at our labs here at BrainTap, and we use them. But the one thing that really fascinated me was how the science is getting so almost exacting that you take this, you kind of showed a screen shot on your presentation where you had this $78,000 EEG. Like we have a $17,000 one. It's very good. It's called the Neuro Infinity, and a lot of our doctors use it, but it's very expensive. So tell us a little bit about how that technology has come along, and now with these wearables, how, at least for neurofeedback, maybe not for some deep research, but for some neurofeedback, how this technology is just basically becoming is so consumer friendly.
Yeah, I think one of the incredible things about this story is that the enthusiasm from practitioners, clinicians, people that are on the front lines trying to treat patients and looking into this technology and not only wanting to use it, but also wanting to validate it. And I've had quite a few discussions with Interaxon about this, and they've just been overwhelmed by the amount of people that have been wanting to do studies with the technology and validate it and see how it is used, how it can be used clinically. And there's been a lot of independent academic institutions that have done studies with these wearables, and some good data has been coming back just within the last couple of years. That specific study was, I believe, done in Toronto, and they were comparing it to, as you said, something like an $80,000 machine called ActiChamp, and what they were looking at was event-related potentials. So you give someone a stimulus, the brain reacts in a certain way, you capture that through the electroencephalography brainwaves, and when you graph that, it should create a certain waveform. And it was a really cool study because what they did was, the ActiChamp system has way more active leads on the head than the Muse system does. But what they did was subtract the number of leads to actually mirror what Muse was doing in terms of how many sensors were on the device and how many electrodes were being used. And by doing that and referencing it a certain way, they were able to show the waveform was very similar. So it was very much validating the electrical signal from Muse in the form of this ERP to show that, hey, we can do this research in terms of validating the actual signal. And a lot goes into that in terms of bioimpedance, how good the sensors are, how good the algorithms in the mobile phone are that are, breaking down mathematically these complex signals and graphing them out. So, what does that translate into? It's the idea that, if the electrical signals are good enough, it's probably good enough for neurofeedback. There's a lot that you can do for EEG. People are getting into quantitative EEG where they're taking very complex snapshots of the brain and, recording minute little processes that require high frequency bands. And that stuff is very experimental and very nuanced, and neurofeedback should be nuanced too, but it comes down to, you don't exactly need the very, very high fidelity to do something good with neurofeedback, as long as you can get general trends. And I think that these companies have passed even that point of just looking at general trends. It can benefit people for getting them into a meditative state and helping them identify what that feels like. I think these devices have the most power in terms of introducing people to the idea of meditation, or even the idea that your brain is actually responding to doing these things. I think that some of us that have been in this field for so long or have been doing this for a while forget that people don't even identify different states that their brain are in. So this idea that your brain is actually doing real things and that the computer is reading that and giving you the audio feedback almost is even a step forward there, to where it gets people more interested in meditation. Then the other step is that it establishes this regular routine of meditation, which is key. And that's something that my colleagues and I at the Navy institution that I'm at right now are trying to put forward. Is our argument for using this technology with the military is that, they're trying to develop a lot of these mental toughness protocols, and mindfulness is a big component in that. But what is the compliance? How often are people, continuing with the meditative practice? And I think that's where a lot of the benefit from these devices come is, it gamifies it. People feel like they're getting some guidance in doing it. They learn about meditation. They identify that the brain actually is having a big effect on their life. And, hopefully what we hope to show in the next couple of years is that it does have a big impact on compliance. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it is having a big effect on compliance, people that have been using it clinically. But in terms of, big studies being done that will track how often people were using it and how well they followed up, that work still needs to be done. But it's a very exciting time for the technology for sure.
Yeah, the big thing too that I found was that on your website, on the podcast site, the YouTube channel, TechforPsych, where I go and I follow you, and you post quite often on there different technologies and different ways of doing things, different podcasts you're on actually too. One of the things that fascinated me was where it takes a really sophisticated EEG device or neurofeedback device to get a whole brain snapshot. You were able to share on one of your videos that they can go there and check out on your YouTube channel, that you could actually create a whole brain picture. Like, these people are spending all this money to get these brain snapshots to see if somebody's right-brained or left-brained, and now we have this technology that can do it. It takes a little bit. You were kind of jumping through some hurdles there, but it's pretty fascinating. I think that just goes one more step further, like how people are using both hemispheres and in their frontal lobe, and all of these different things that you're finding out in different activities is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I would call my foray into that brain imaging pretty rudimentary, but it was fun. And what it shows is that this stuff is coming along, and it really empowers the individual user, the individual clinician, or the individual person that wants to be a researcher and just educate themselves on the subject. So it actually is becoming increasingly easier to record brainwave data yourself and put it into a mathematical analysis program like MATLAB, and use open source software like UCSD put out, which is EEG Lab, and use the data to map it onto 3D models of the head. Now, I didn't know exactly what it was showing. I don't have a PhD in neuroscience or brain mapping, but I know that it was brainwave data that I took of myself and mapped it out. Now, if I had more time, I could probably play around with it more. But I think why that video is so popular is it is this idea that, as this information and these technologies become more democratized, we're going to get individual people looking into the science more. And that's really exciting because, that really opens the floodgates for people to experiment and push the technology even further. I think that the more people that are looking into it, the more support that these companies have, allowing them to even further develop their own products. So it's kind of like a very supportive ecosystem that's being created on the internet with these types of devices and people that are using them.
That's great. Well, I know back in the 80s when we first started using the Mind Mirror, which was a very rudimentary LED format where you mostly use galvanic skin response and see which side of the brain was being active. It wasn't very accurate, but it did give people a good look at it. Now, so people might think you're a mad scientist out there somewhere doing all these tests and that, but you were telling me that you're doing a lot with universities like Stanford. So tell us a little bit about what's going on at Stanford.
Yeah, so the Stanford entrepreneurial, it's called Stanford Brainstorm, and we have 8 different psychiatrists that are relatively young, kind of just getting out of residency, that are really interested in entrepreneurship. And, we've been interfacing with a lot of really interesting people. Now, I won't say that the actual EEG device stuff we've focused on very much so far. We're doing a lot of things. We had our launch event, which had a lot of virtual reality companies come and show us their technologies. And that was in Stanford. That was really fun. So just getting more acquainted with virtual reality technology and augmented reality technology, that's coming a long ways too for mental health treatment. And, we're interfacing with a lot of interesting groups, but, that's just another thing that's been so great about this whole experience is they've really like what I'm doing. And, I'm a part of the board, so it isn't exactly just TechforPsych interfacing with Stanford. I'm actually on the board of the Stanford Brainstorm as well. And I document a lot of their events because, I think that what I have to bring to the table, not only with this EEG technology is I'm a pretty good videographer too. So I've been able to capture some of the events and sort of promote this idea that a lot of entrepreneurial activities are happening in mental health. And, we're definitely interfacing with some of these technology companies that are coming along, things like Interaxon and Emotive. So the idea is to, bring some of these companies that really have been scientifically validated into the fold of the academic arena and, grow together. So I think that has been a very positive and healthy experience. And we really just founded the group this past summer. So it's only been 6 months, and we've done, I feel like, a lot since then. But again, there's a lot more to be had. We're really, kind of still accumulating board members and figuring out who we want to work with in terms of the business and academic world. But it's been a great experience. And I am on the board for something called the Psychiatry Innovation Lab, which is an official event of the American Psychiatric Association, where we have people come pitch ideas in entrepreneurship for mental health. And we've been able to raise money and award prizes for people that have the best ideas, so that they can use that prize money to further their own entrepreneurial ideas as well. So lots going on. It's been a great ride so far, for sure.
Well, I know that our BrainTap doctors and users out there are probably wondering, gosh, what does this have to do with BrainTap? So I'm just going to kind of key them in. When we were in Hawaii, we put the Muse on the head of somebody using the BrainTap, and we got to see it in real time, what was happening with that. And that amazed people. Now, unfortunately, Muse changed their software. So now for whatever reason, it thinks theta is asleep. And our technology teaches people to go to theta most of the time. So we had to use a third-party app with the Muse device, which is very nice, because Muse actually opened up their APK, is that what they call it, or whatever?
SDK, the software development kit.
Yes.
Right.
So they opened that up. And I think one of the things we're looking at now, and I think that this is something maybe you can tell us where you think the technology is going, is we want to really create an interactive BrainTap, where it can read the brain waves, feed it back into the system, and actually do some training. Now, we've done this before, but it was way too expensive. Now with dry sensor technology, tell me how that technology has kind of revolutionized this whole field, because we couldn't do it before. If you had to use the goo and put the probes on, it just would take too long to do a session.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of material science advances within the last decade. I had a good conversation with Graham Moffat, who's the VP of Scientific Regulatory Affairs at Interaxon. Basically, you can call him the head of research. And one of the things that he was talking about is these new materials that have come along that allow for good bioimpedance. So what happens when you put a sensor on someone's scalp is it needs to conduct the actual voltage changes that the brain is creating. When the brain fires, it creates a voltage change in that local area called a local field potential. And the sensor needs to actually detect that. In the past, what was required is that you would have a sensor and you would have electrode paste that would, further the conduction between the actual scalp and the sensor. But now with these new materials, we're able to get a adequate level of bioimpedance so that you don't have to have the goo. You don't have to, put it down into people's hair and, get it out afterwards. That was actually one of the interesting things, not to take too much of a side tangent, but that study that we were talking about before, where they compared the ERP signal to the ActiChamp. One of the interesting points that they brought up is that the setup time for the Muse was 10 to 15 minutes, whereas the setup time to get the ERPs for the ActiChamp was almost an hour. Not only that, but you had to have technicians putting on the actual leads with the goo paste to get the signal right. So basically what's happening is with these sensors, it really reduces time that it takes to get these signals, as well as overhead costs, because you would need like a technician to put it on rather than the person just being able to slip it on themselves. So where that oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, keep going.
So, where that comes into actually getting brainwaves for our own individual purposes, it becomes really interesting, because you can do things like put it on and, have your BrainTap going at the same time and see what EEG signals come out of that. And some really interesting developments have been being made with other companies. I know that they're incorporating EEG signal into virtual reality goggles now. So that's coming along, where you're actually going to have brainwave signals sensed, and the virtual reality scene is going to be changed depending on your brainwaves. And it's absolutely something that you could do with BrainTap as well. And then you brought up another point of, well, what happens when these companies change their algorithms? So that's one of the challenging things about where the space is right now, because they really keep their analysis algorithms very close to their heart, because this is proprietary information. They worked very hard to collect the data. I know Interaxon used a good deal of Buddhist monks to track their brainwave data and use that for the actual algorithms that determine whether you're in a meditative state or not. So this proprietary information and the amount that they're willing to share that, and how they actually break down the brainwave signals, is always a push-pull, because they very do much want to interact with other entities to further the research and further validate their technology. But at the same time, they need to keep alive. So basically they need to hold that close and not let other companies basically take all their information that they've worked so hard to get. And as this gets further along, it gets more and more complicated, because they're not using just individual frequency bands anymore. They used to take the complex EEG signal and break it down into individual frequency waves, and then the ratios of those waves would correspond to actual meditative states. I'm told now that they're actually using artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to pick out different nuances of the EEG signal and use that to determine classifiers on the data, where you would have a Buddhist monk and it would analyze that signal and then apply what it had learned to these new data sets that are coming in, to higher levels of mathematical complexity that our brains are currently unable to comprehend. So it's starting to get more and more interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. I was just at the CES show, the Consumer Electronics Show. We were featured in a group called Showstoppers. But then I got to walk the floor, and there's a whole digital health floor. I mean, that was never there before, and I haven't been there in a few years, so it was kind of fascinating. I saw there were like 6 different groups doing things with EEG technology, dry sensor technology, and most of it was really coming down in price. I mean, we're talking about retail prices around $200, $250. I mean, the Muse is there right now, but I mean, it seems like this is something that's going mainstream. Where do you see the technology going for the general population?
Well, I hope that what's going to happen is that, as this technology becomes more and more advanced and nuanced, it's really going to correspond to people's trust in it. Because I think that's what's happening right now, is not only with patients, but also with providers building up, this idea that the technology really is tracking brainwaves and that it can help people. And there's so many factors that are going into it right now. I think the FDA is just playing catch up right now. I know they've created a task force to try to figure out how they can take a look at these technologies that are coming along. Hopefully what's going to happen is that, they're going to be able to streamline the process of validating the technology so that these companies can legally start using it and claiming that it treats specific disorders, because a lot of this technology is sort of stuck in the lifestyle wellness area currently. But as the FDA, improves that process and can validate the technology, I think more and more providers are going to be comfortable using it in their everyday practice. Some of the talks that I've done in the last year or two, I've had hands go up from clinicians asking if it's, FDA approved. And it's a legitimate question. It's kind of a funny question, but it's a legitimate question at the same time, because, in my mind, I'm like, all right, it's meditation and neurofeedback. I don't really see terrible risks with that. I feel like it can really benefit people. But at the same time, clinicians are worried about, a lot of people are worried about going outside of the lines sometimes. So getting that, stamp of approval on it, I think will be important going forward. So I think that's the 5-year frame there, where more and more studies are done in terms of validating the actual technology that it works, and then clinical studies, clinical trials starting up. And I know that there's a couple underway that are showing that, improving someone's ability to recognize their own internal state leads to improved mental health. So that's the 5-year frame. I think further out, I could make all sorts of predictions that I don't know if they would pan out or not. But I think what's happening is it's this general trend of technology becoming more powerful and cheaper at the same time. If we look at the mobile phones, just within the last 10 years, the processing power of those have gone up 100-fold in terms of like the first iPhone compared to the latest one. And what does that mean? That means more data processing. So as we get more and more data processing getting cheaper and cheaper, that allows the devices to be more and more powerful, tracking the brainwaves that much more closely, validating the technology even more. I think that one of the things that hopefully what we'll see, and I know there's a couple of different institutions working on these things, but things like magnetic resonance imaging is going to get smaller. So the high-end actual imaging of the brain is going to become more portable. And there's a lot of mathematical algorithms and ways of actually improving what you see in the signal without making the magnets bigger, because we have these giant machines that are taking up half of a room. And so how do you really apply that to the average consumer? So the idea is taking these technologies and scaling them down so that it's applicable to everyday use. And someone that I think is pretty interesting that I'm waiting to hear back from what she's been up to lately, but someone like Mary Lou Jepsen that's taking a look at near-infrared spectroscopy. I think that's a really interesting example where she wants to take what's done with magnetic resonance imaging and use near-infrared spectroscopy to create an actual wearable. And for anybody that's not aware of what that technology does, it sends this infrared signal to within an inch deep of the cortex. That light gets diffracted and is analyzed and put back together to create an actual image of the brain in a device that could be worn in a ski cap. So things like that, I think, are the long-term potential of where this technology is going. And EEG, I think, will be a part of that. But I think that we're going to be seeing more and more powerful, more nuanced brain imaging technologies that allow us to see our own brain, which further not only diagnostic capabilities, but also the ability to treat with things like neurofeedback. So that's where I see it going. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, well, that's great. No, so tell us a little bit. I know we've got a lot to share, and we're almost winding down this actual podcast today. But tell our listeners a little bit about how they can follow you, because you're kind of, you hang out in that space. You kind of give us. When I want to know what's going on new, I go to your YouTube channel, TechforPsych. But is there any other resources you would recommend for people and how they would do that?
Yeah. So. My website's www.techforpsych.com. You can go there and check out what materials I put out so far. Pretty easily found on YouTube. You can just type Cody Rall M.D. into the search bar or TechforPsych, and the channel will come right up. So that's what's going on there. I'm also on Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook, TechforPsych. And if you want to check out Stanford Brainstorm, you can search for that on Google as well, and that should come up right quick. And Psychiatry Innovation Lab will be up too. I'm just double checking. So the Stanford website is www.stanfordbrainstorm.com. So any of those resources are pretty interesting if you're interested in entrepreneurship and mental health and what's going on in terms of neuroscience and brain health. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, we'll be posting those links to, if you're listening and you're not there, just go to our website for the BrainTap Journal, and we'll have those listed there so people can. And also, if you download it from iTunes, it'll be in the description portion of that, so they can go there. So, with all the questions and all the information you shared with us today, what question did I forget to ask you that you think our audience needs to know about what you're doing, or brainwaves, or just in general? Your area of expertise?
I'm really focusing on clinical application right now. So there's going to be I think more and more material that's going to be coming out on my YouTube channel about taking a look at what devices are best for which situations. It's one of the questions that I get the most on YouTube is, I'm thinking about doing this, that, or the other. What's the best device to get? Because there's a couple of ones that are already out and more that are coming on the market, ones that are more focused on brain-computer interface, ones that are more focused on neurofeedback, ones that are tailored specifically to ADHD treatment, that sort of thing. So I'm going to be doing more and more, taking a look at specific devices and letting people know what my opinion is on how they can be best used. And then also doing a lot of work with the Department of Defense in terms of incorporating these technologies and using them in a way that can be clinically applicable. So if you're interested, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That stuff's going to be coming along in the coming months. And I really appreciate you having me on. And that's pretty much the goal for now going forward.
Well, I think that our listeners are really going to enjoy this. I would love to have you back on as you develop all these new technologies and breakthroughs, because you seem to have the infinite time to do all this that's doing it. So, but thanks for being on the call, and we look forward to having you on again. And I can't recommend it enough that you go to the YouTube channel, TechforPsych, subscribe to it. Though YouTube will actually send you updates every time you post a new video. You can go there and watch it. It's a great way to keep up with this science. There's so much out there to sift through, and it's great to have somebody with your knowledge base to be able to sift through that for us so that we can just get kind of the cream. I know there's a lot more out there. You can go to the internet and get inundated with information, but I love to have someone who's an expert that I can just go to and go to that channel. So thank you very much for being on the call, and look forward to future developments from you.
Yeah, and let me just say, I've been trying the BrainTap, and you have been taking me into some interesting places in my mind, sir. That's been a lot of fun. So I'm going to have a video coming up on that pretty soon. I've really enjoyed the BrainTap as well. But yeah, thanks for having me on, and talk to you later.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.